What's up, everybody? It's Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know, and on this channel, we break down the trials and cases you care most about so you can understand how the American civil and criminal justice system works. And we try to make sure you understand what your rights are in every situation, which is why we try to walk you through the entire legal process while also answering your insightful questions along the way. And while it's not legal advice, it's always exciting. So buckle up for another episode of The Lawyer You Know. What's up, everybody? A little bit of a different video than we expected to be doing today, breaking down Sarah Boone's pretrial. What happens at a pretrial? Well, we've been over that. They talk about whether or not the trial is happening in 2 weeks or a week, whenever the pretrial is set, how long it's going to be, how many witnesses there may be, if there are any issues in the case, if there are any motions in limine that haven't been heard yet that we need to have heard. Well, instead, the answer of will we have the trial was the last answer, or the last question that was answered in this pretrial hearing. And as most of you know and have come and joined me on Instagram and Twitter at Tragos Law, you sent me DMs, you sent me links, you sent me things on this case. So we all now know that this case has been continued until April 10th, I believe, and the pretrial will be in March, at the end of March, 2 weeks before this trial date. So why did it get continued at all? And knowing that it's continued, why did it get continued all the way until April? This case is now 3 years old. We've had 6 different defense lawyers on this case. We've had a lot of the evidence on this case from the jump, a lot of her statements from the jump, the suitcase. We know what happened. We know who did it. We just don't know why or how, right? Those are kind of the questions that we still need answered in this trial. So it wasn't some huge investigation that took years to take place, but most of the delays have been on the defense side, whether it's from attorneys or from the client herself. So we're going to talk about why it was continued so long. We're going to talk about the battered spouse syndrome defense, which is one of the reasons it got continued. And we're actually going to look at some notice requirements in Florida and then play just a small part of the interrogation to help us answer some questions. But a lot of time to cover this case now, a lot of time to get to 200K subscribers. A lot of you posted that on Twitter. Gives us more time to get to 200K so I can hop over there for part of this trial. It was not live streamed. That does not necessarily mean the trial is not going to be live streamed. That's still to be decided, to be determined, to be announced. But either way, I may make my way over there for a day or two of this trial. If you haven't subscribed already, now's a good time to subscribe to get us to 200K so we can make sure that we get over there and take a look at the jurors. And I can sit in this courtroom and get the vibes of what it's like between Sarah Boone and her attorney and other things like that. Hit the reminder bell if you're here for all of these cases, all these breakdowns. I can never get to every case you guys ask for, but I do appreciate always, how you guys do provide great content, great questions, and it helps with these streams so much. So hit that like button if you haven't already. We've got 1,300 people in the chat here, so let's get to 1,000 likes as we go. I can't even see the likes, so you guys will have to let me know when we get to 1,000 likes. So let's jump into it. Why did this case get continued? Well, first, her attorney was not present in court. He was appearing via Zoom. He was not going to miss another court hearing and have the court order him to show up. So he did show up by Zoom, and he had COVID recently. I don't know if he still had it today. Sarah Boone was not in the courtroom. That should have been our first indication about what was going to happen in this case. So she wasn't there. He wasn't there. And the judge ended up continuing the case because he was not able to meet with Sarah Boone. And we are going to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. We're not going to call people liars. We don't know. We weren't there. We don't know. I hear some people saying he probably didn't have COVID. I will say this guy was doing everything he could to continue this case or not have this case tried in January. And he got his wish, and never put anything past lawyers. Never test them and say you're not going to be able to get this case continued, because they always find a way. Usually I'm on the side trying to push cases to go to trial. So it is frustrating to me for the most part when this happens. So why did it get continued? Well, he had COVID. He wasn't able to meet with Sarah Boone. They weren't able to talk about their defense or prep their defense, but somehow they were able to come up with a new defense. And I don't mean come up with like they fabricated it, but I mean, after looking at the evidence in this case, they have determined now together as a defense team that the battered spouse syndrome defense will be a defense that they are going to go with. And they need time to better prepare that defense. It's been 3 years, but we want to give criminal defendants every benefit of the doubt. We don't want to step on their constitutional rights. So the judge did the right thing and is going to allow them to go forward with this defense. However, what do you need in Florida in order to even have a chance to present this defense? Let's take a look at it real quick. Florida Rule 3.201, battered spouse syndrome. Okay. Battered spouse syndrome. When in a criminal case, it shall be the intention of the defendant to rely on the defense of battered spouse syndrome at trial. No evidence offered by the defendant for the purpose of establishing that the defense shall be admitted in a case unless advance notice in writing of the defense shall have been given by the defendant as hereinafter provided. So how do you have to put them on notice? Put them being the state. Okay. Which I don't think this has happened yet, but I assume it's going to happen now. And he was orally letting the court know that's what's happening. Time for filing. The defendant shall give notice of intent to rely on the defense of battered spouse syndrome no later than 30 days prior to trial. Well, some of us struggle with math here. Some of us were told that there would be no math. And January 17th to January 30th is only 13 days. So therefore, 30 days would not suffice. So that's one of the reasons it had to be continued more than 30 days to give them the opportunity to notify the state in time so that everybody can get their experts to evaluate Sarah Boone and prepare this defense and the response to this defense. The notice, what does it have to contain? Shall contain a statement of particulars showing the nature of the defense the defendant expects to prove and the names and addresses of the witnesses by whom the defendant expects to show battered spouse syndrome insofar as possible. So that's the notice requirement. So we are going to get witnesses about their past domestic violence issues. We are going to get witnesses talking about that, which is going to make this case take a lot longer than maybe it would have without a defense like this and without getting into their past. So another reason this case is continued. Bankowitz, her lawyer, has a death penalty case here in Florida that's going to last 3 weeks starting in February. Imagine being that client. He has COVID. He doesn't have time to meet with Sarah Boone. This trial is supposed to go January 30th for probably a week. I haven't really seen how long it's going to go. So this trial was going to bleed into February. And then also in February, he was going to try a 3-week death penalty case. That's rough. That's a rough turnaround. I don't care how good of a lawyer you are. John, go ahead and prep a poll on YouTube for whether or not people think, does battered spouse syndrome apply to Sarah Boone? Yes or no, as the poll questions. And let me know when it's ready and we'll put it up. But as we're thinking about that, let's talk about what battered spouse syndrome actually is. Okay? In a nutshell, usually it's women. Okay, I'll start out by saying the way the case law was constructed, and that's the way a lot of this stuff comes to play. A woman argues this fact pattern that her husband is physically dominant over her, abuses her over and over again. She knows she's in fear of serious bodily harm. She's almost died from prior beatings. She knew when he starts to get angry and he's going to start to beat her. She is scared. She responds by shooting him. That's what a lot of the cases are about. Okay. And usually it is the woman because they explain and the court focuses on the physical imbalance. We are not going to say that in today's day and age. It is battered spouse syndrome, not battered woman syndrome or battered wife syndrome. And we know from other cases that the male or even the larger or bigger or stronger person in the relationship can still be the battered person in the relationship. So it's an interesting discussion if you're going to apply it to case law. If you have a man as a victim today, as to whether the case law would apply to someone that is physically dominant over the other person. So that's really interesting. That's probably a conversation for another day. But what do they have to show to be a battered spouse and have this battered spouse syndrome in this defense? It is kind of akin to self-defense, but not exactly the same. Because if you can prove that, and some of the questions that come along with it is, how often were you abused? How serious was the abuse and were the injuries afterwards? How reasonable was it for you to be in fear of serious bodily injury or death? Is there a physical imbalance? There doesn't have to be, but if one person's 6'3", 250 pounds, the other's 5'2", 105 pounds, that does come into play as a factor here in the battered spouse syndrome. And you have to convince the jury that you were the battered spouse, and that's why you responded the way you did. A lot of you are already applying this to Sarah Boone's case. I have not yet, okay? We are just going through what battered spouse syndrome is, and then we will apply it to Sarah Boone's case, and we will talk about that together, okay? A lot of it has to do with the state of mind, right? Because when we talk about self-defense cases, we talked about this in the Theodore Edgecombe case, Kyle Rittenhouse case, Curtis Reeves cases. Were they in reasonable fear? Would a reasonable person have been in fear? Let's get into the mind of Curtis Reeves and see what he was thinking as an older, decrepit kind of man, which is lawyers made that argument. Or Kyle Rittenhouse in his case. All right, the poll is live, so get your votes in. I'm going to wait till we have 1,000 votes on that poll before I read what's happening on whether or not you think this applies to Sarah Boone. And we haven't gotten to my application of it yet. So when we talk about the reasonableness and getting into the mind of the defendant, battered spouse syndrome kind of changes that a little bit because of it's not an interaction like Curtis Reeves and the alleged victim in that case. Whereas the first time they've ever met each other, they get into an altercation. Same thing with Kyle Rittenhouse, going on those streets, never met those people, trying to react with what they were doing. Was it reasonable? And with what he was getting responded with for him to act the way that he did. Theodore Edgecombe, same thing. Was it reasonable for him to respond the way that he did for the alleged victim in that case that chased him down the car, got out of the car, whatever it may be? You remember those fact patterns if you were there for those trials. But in this case, there's an ongoing relationship. You have a better idea of what this person is going to do. This is their MO. They start drinking, they get mad, it's late at night, they take it out on me. It gets worse every time. They apologize afterwards, they buy me gifts, and then the next time he has a bad day at work, he comes home and kicks the dog, but instead of the dog, it's me. Whatever it may be, that's the story that you tell the jury to prove this. So why would Sarah Boone need extra time for this? Why is there a notice requirement in the rules? Why does it have to be at least 30 days prior to trial? Well, generally speaking, you have to have experts on this case. And the expert has to determine whether or not Sarah Boone or any criminal defendant actually has and suffers from battered spouse syndrome. And did she believe that her partner was going to seriously injure or kill her? And the state also has the right to have her examined by their mental health experts. And when we look at the burden of proof in a battered spouse syndrome defense, it is on the defense. The defense has to prove she was a battered spouse. The defense has to prove she reasonably was in fear for serious bodily injury or for her life. And she responded appropriately based on being a battered spouse. But the threat of violence has to be imminent, and it has to be reasonable. So that's battered spouse syndrome in a nutshell. That's what the defense looks like. Okay? Applying generally to cases. But how does it apply to Sarah Boone? So the questions that I asked in the beginning generally on these cases is, how often does the abuse happen? Well, I think we have some statements and some criminal records to show it happens quite often, potentially going both ways, but there have been multiple arrests in this case. And so I think it happens often enough to check that box. How substantial were her injuries or the beatings? And we're going to give her the benefit of the doubt through the first couple factors here. And again, the injuries were substantial enough for there to actually be arrests and complaints and treatment. And she discusses some of the physical injuries in her interrogation, which we will get to. All right, we're at 750 votes on whether or not battered spouse syndrome applies to Sarah Boone. So about 250 more, you go vote. Hit the like button before you vote. All right. So serious enough injuries, I think, for this case, for battered spouse syndrome. Will an expert say she has battered spouse syndrome? I have a feeling the answer to that's going to be yes. I think the defense will be able to find an expert that says Sarah Boone suffers from battered spouse syndrome. Next question. Was there a physical imbalance? Sarah Boone is not a large human, but George fit in a suitcase. Also not a very large human. We also have domestic violence and abuse going both ways and arrests happening to both partners. So is she going to be able to prove that physical dominance that adds to her fear? That's going to be a difficult one. And I think that's where the testimony of other witnesses is going to be really important, because you better believe we're going to hear from George's family about the white devil or whatever, the white dragon or whatever they called her that she said. We're going to hear from friends and family members, potentially even, I think Brian was his name, Sarah Boone's ex-husband that was called. He even said he knows they have a history of abuse. So we're going to hear from them. And the last question, and perhaps the most difficult for Sarah Boone to get over in this case, and a lot of you have already mentioned it, is was she in fear of imminent danger, serious bodily harm, or death, even based on the history of abuse? Ever? I think the answer to that's probably yes. That night? I don't know. We watched the entirety of this police interrogation together, and if you want to watch it in its entirety, I encourage you to check out our playlist on this. But we're going to watch about 3 minutes of it together, because my recollection was that she said things were great. We were doing great ever since the last arrest. We were just so great. We were so happy, having a good time. We were drinking, playing games that night. Everything was great. So I don't know what's going on. And a lot of you have been saying that too. She said they were having a good day. I agree. But there is this little clip here of 3 minutes, and I absolutely think they're going to use a lot of that. And there's a little bit of that in this clip as well. But in the view of applying this battered spouse syndrome to her case, there's a little snippet here of this interrogation where, if I'm her lawyer, this is what we are focusing on. So let's take a listen to this together just for a couple minutes, and then we'll continue to apply it. And after we talk through this, so let me post the poll results now. I think we're probably at 1,000. John, send me what the results are. And after we play this, and after we finalize our little analysis here of applying the factors and what the battered spouse syndrome actually is to the facts that we know in this case, I'm going to post another poll. So here we go. 1,000 votes. Does battered spouse syndrome apply to Sarah Boone? 85% of you said no. 15% of you said yes. So after we play this clip and realizing that this is what she is going to tell mental health experts, this is what she's probably going to try to grasp onto during trial. After we listen to this, John, I want you to post the poll again. Refresh it, start it over, post it again, and see if anybody has changed their votes. We'll probably only wait for 500 votes on the new poll just to get a little quicker results. But here we go. Let's listen to these few minutes together and listen closely, right? And put your lawyer hat on and try to see it from the other side potentially. I'm not saying she's going to win, but can this even be applied to her? At first, you probably think no way, because we've watched the entirety of this interrogation. But there are some parts that may make you think it's possible. And actually, John, I want to add a third thing. Yes, no, and maybe. Let's see how many maybes there are if we changed any no's to maybes. All right, here we go.
It's been good. Like, I don't even know where this is coming from. We've had good days lately, even considering everything that's going on with our jobs and life in general and ex-wives and everything. It's been good. Like, I don't even know where this is coming from.
Yeah,
I
you
don't
said
even
the
know.
last physical was probably, you said, I think, what, a month ago? Where you got the injury, right? You said that was a
I'll
month
say
ago?
a few weeks, give or take, yeah.
A few weeks. That was the last, like, physical altercation between the two of you? You said a month ago he hit you with a curtain rod.
Yeah, with a curtain rod. That's why I can't believe you guys didn't take that either.
A month ago, he hit you with a curtain rod. Okay? Just think about that. Let's put that in the bucket of battered spouse syndrome.
Wow.
Like, we've been good. I don't know if, like, it's since the last time he got out of jail. Like, we've been good, and he's been having his classes and seeing his probation officer, who's amazing. So.
What do you mean by good? What's your definition of good?
The probation officer?
Oh, no, you said you guys have been good. What's your definition?
I've been good. I don't think you all understand. He comes at me all the time. He comes at me. So it's either I flee or try to go upstairs and go to sleep. That's usually what it is. I don't know if you talked to Brian about any of that, but most of the time when I flee, I go over there. So.
Right, but you're saying that you guys have been good, and when I asked you yesterday, there hasn't, the last incident that you could remember was the curtain rod incident, which you said was a month ago, so.
Give or take.
Right, so what do you mean by he comes after you? Like,
he gets belligerently drunk.
mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know if y'all have looked through my phone yet and seen any of the pictures and the videos that I have taken.
Oh, they look through your phone, all right. So again, now she starts getting into, he gets drunk. I don't know if you've looked through the pictures in my phone. Well, let's see what's in those pictures.
Mm-hmm. And at one point, I started documenting everything.
Okay.
So you all will see in my pictures, bloody fingers, split foreheads, he split my nose.
You will see pictures. So I expect at trial, we will see pictures, bloody lip, bloody nose, bloody fingers, injuries to Sarah Boone at the hands of George.
This,
right.
I don't know if Brian told you about it, where I had to have I had one really bad surgery, but then it got really, 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 really bad, where I had to go like 4 or 5 more times afterwards and then tend to it. And then poking me in the back of the leg.
Right.
So it's.
Then why are you still with him?
Everybody asks me that. When I tell you guys this, I really love him. Like I do. And I feel like I can help him.
So I will say, I've seen a lot of these cases, a lot of these battered spouse cases, okay, on both sides. And so that's why I'm a little tainted by her overall demeanor and actions and how she's kind of acting around it is not like your everyday battered spouse. But that response right there, why are you still with him? Because I love him. I want to help him, crying. That actually is pretty prototypical battered spouse syndrome.
I feel like I could help him, which I did, because he came a really long way from where he was in Philadelphia to moving back to here and to dealing with everything else that he's been dealing with. Mm-hmm. I've really helped him. I've bailed him out of jail, 3 times. I've gone to every single hearing and every single arraignment, everything that I did for him. Gone to see all his public defenders, go to the state. I've gone to the state. I did everything for him because I'm trying to help him, because I had hope in him.
I'm trying to help him because I have hope in him. I'm doing everything I can for him, even though he abuses me. Very common in battered spouse syndrome cases. And the emotion she's showing here during this couple minutes.
And he was trying. He was really trying. And then he starts to think about things, and I think he gets overwhelmed. And then it's like, the next thing I know, he's drinking. So it's like, oh man, I know where this is going to go. So I'm going to go upstairs and read a book, or I'm going to go for a bike ride, or I'm going to do something else. Where I don't want to.
So when he starts drinking, sometimes I go upstairs. Sometimes I leave. Very important, especially when we know the facts of what happened in this case. She went upstairs.
Drink. I don't want to drink. The occasional wine, whatever, or if it's a weekend, that's when you have a good time. You don't have to wake up the next day. I have to wake up the next day and do things. I have to tend to Lucas. I have to take him to school. I have all this stuff to do. He doesn't know how to, I guess, maintain himself, where I can do 50 things at once and still know the 50 things more prior that I need to get done. He can't process like that. He didn't process like that. So he would literally, not literally, but have smoke coming out of his ears.
So he would have smoke coming out of his ears after he drank. Okay? And that's the little clip. Yes, Nefertiti, we did fix that. So now we're going to have an I don't know. And I'm interested to see how many people say I don't know. Tori, I might have missed it, but did Sarah Boone tell anyone about past abuse by the victim? Yes. That's why I wanted to play that clip. And there's also going to be criminal history for both of them against each other. So that clip, okay, let's apply that here. We've got a ton of new members, which is awesome. Members only stream coming Friday. which will be cool. It's not going to be on any case. Nobody's going to miss any legal analysis. It's just going to be some behind the scenes stuff. So welcome to all the new members. See how the sausage gets made. So, so when we talk about this case specifically, and we're applying the battered spouse syndrome, and John, you can go ahead and repost the poll with a yes, no, and I don't know. Okay, after listening to just that little clip. Yeah, John, there's also a typo in the title. It's trial, not trail. Title of our video. Okay, thank you for pointing that out. Whoever just did, I saw it fly through the chat. So let's think about what happened in this case and apply it to what she just said. So we know the abuse coming over and over again, knowing that it's coming, being in fear that it's coming, that it's getting worse. We know there was abuse. We know there were injuries. There's documents of the injuries. There's pictures of the injuries. Okay. So when we talk about an explanation like she just had, he drinks, he gets angry, smoke comes out of his ears. He doesn't know how to process it. He beats me. I flee. I run to the room. So we know they were drinking. He was in the suitcase. Could her next step of the argument be, he got angry in that suitcase, so I fled. I ran upstairs. He started screaming at me. I knew that if I let him out, he was going to abuse me, so I left him in there. I think that that has a non-zero chance. Does it have a good chance? No. But a non-zero chance, meaning less than 0% chance of working. Okay? Now, is it the truth? I don't know. Does it change what she's already said in her interrogation? Yes, she never mentions that. So at the end of the day, as we've said from the jump, her interrogation and all of her admissions and statements to the police are likely going to sink her. She said everything was great. They're playing hide and seek. They were drinking. I left a little space for him to get out. I went upstairs and passed out. Nothing about being afraid. Never once did she say she was afraid. Never once did she say she was in fear for her life in the hours of admissions and conversations with the police. So what's really interesting about this is, how do the damning videos on her phone of him in the suitcase apply to battered spouse syndrome? Almost sounds like she's taunting him. She knows he's in there. She knows he can't breathe. And she walks away. She goes upstairs and passes out. And when she wakes up in the morning and he's not next to her in bed, she doesn't get up. She doesn't go downstairs. She doesn't check on him for a while. Getting the updated poll results here. Do you think it's changed? Ooh, interesting. Interesting. See, this is why I love you guys. Open-minded. Let's at least discuss it. Do we think Sarah Boone's going to win? No, I don't think so. I think most of us think she's going to lose. But it's interesting to use this battered spouse syndrome and see if it is at least her best argument. And for the first time ever, on any poll we've done in this case, less than 50% of you are throwing the book at her, guaranteeing guilt. Not guaranteeing guilt, but you know what I mean. Just picking the straight guilty answer or option. So does battered spouse syndrome apply to Sarah Boone? 15% said yes last time. This time, 16% said yes. So up 1%. Out of 1,000 votes, not the biggest deal in the world. But last time, 85% of you said no, meaning not going to apply, probably guilty. Now that number dropped to 48%. That's a huge drop, because 35% of you now say maybe, and almost the entirety of that 35% came from the no group. So very interesting from you guys. I really appreciate that. I appreciate you thinking through it and saying maybe, okay, maybe. Even probably not, probably could have been a good option, and that probably would have won if it's probably not. But it's interesting to think about. Here's my big question, okay? The biggest looming question still in front of me. If you're going to go with self-defense, you usually have to say, I did intend to kill them because they were coming at me. In a battered spouse syndrome, usually you do have to say, I intended to kill them because I thought they were going to kill me. So is that going to fly in the face of this defense for Sarah Boone? Is she actually going to admit now that she meant to do this? It'll be totally impeachable by her statements and admissions she's already made. It's also, this battered spouse syndrome to me makes it much more likely that she testifies, depending on how much of her statements they can get out during the direct and cross of the experts who are going to talk to her. Thank you, Lori. But is she going to admit that she meant to keep him in that suitcase because she was afraid of what he was going to do to her? Which comes into my little hypothetical fact pattern, which all of you could come up with a million ways she could try to explain it. Thank you, Michelle T. But I would be shocked if she admitted she meant to keep him in that suitcase, even for her own safety. We were playing games. Everything was great. We drank a bottle of wine. We weren't intoxicated or overly intoxicated or overly drunk. Everything was fun. We were having a good time. He got in the suitcase. I left room for him to open it up. Then I just passed out. That's the story. Total accident, which brings me to Stephen Binkley. I'm in my last year of law school. Doesn't this fall under the line more of culpable negligence than second-degree murder? So more of a negligent homicide, a manslaughter here in Florida. I would agree with you. And that's kind of where we as a group and as a community fell the first time we discussed this case. We felt like it was more manslaughter than second-degree murder, but a lot of people, based on the cell phone video of their interaction while George was in the suitcase begging for his life, saying he couldn't breathe, wanting to get out, and she said no. Some people were swayed towards second-degree murder. Here's an interesting part of this, Stephen. I think this battered spouse syndrome is going to make it difficult for them to argue that it was negligent, which is what she tried to argue in a lot of her statements and admissions and interrogation. She tried to argue this was an accident, this was not intentional. She used that verbiage over and over again. But those are kind of two different ways to argue this case. Now, she could say she was so scared that he was going to hurt her, battered spouse syndrome, that she didn't know what to do, so she just decided to leave him in the suitcase, but she didn't know that he was going to die. She didn't mean to kill him. She just wanted to stop him from hurting her. That's how you can kind of balance that it was negligent, but also battered spouse syndrome defense. Because otherwise, I did whatever it took to stop him. I wanted him dead so he couldn't hurt me anymore. That doesn't work for a negligent homicide. But good question, and way to think through that. And these are interesting charging decisions by state attorneys. I've been involved in charging decisions when I was at the state attorney's office, and it's always interesting trying to find the right thing to charge. You don't want to overcharge, but you want to charge appropriately to gain justice for the victims. Tori, all of her story has been repeatedly that they were playing and they had a great day. How will she be able to prove immediate danger? It's going to be tough. Except, now again, just based on her statements, if you take a couple steps and connect dots from that, he was drinking, steam started coming out of his ears, and he was angry that he was in the suitcase. So she knew, based on being beaten before, she knew it was coming if she let him out of that suitcase. That's all I could think of, but you're right, Tori. She didn't say that at all in any interview, any admission, body cam, or interrogation with law enforcement. Welcome, Allison, Grace T, and Darlene. Bunch of new members here. Phop. How can she go with that now when she has said over and over again that she didn't mean it and it was an accident? Again, Phop, that is absolutely something she is going to have to explain. I don't think this defense scares the state. I think it's going to change the way they're going to have to present evidence at trial, which is why the state did not object to a continuance either. The state was not pushing for this case to go because they now have to kind of, audible, change, react, adapt to this defense and how they're going to present their case. It's very interesting. Legally, it's very interesting. VG, has there been a case where the battered spouse syndrome won? Absolutely. Yes. I think, so there was the trial in Orlando the wife that was charged with murdering her husband, she won that, or she was not guilty. I believe it was self-defense. It may have even been battered spouse syndrome. I have to look. It just was recent within the last year where she won. And it was a battered spouse or self-defense case. So it has won. It's not like an insanity defense. Mo, I honestly was believing her more when I thought it was a drunken mistake. I agree, Mo. But maybe her lawyers told her, hey, Sarah, maybe you don't realize this, but if we prove that it was negligent and you didn't mean to do it, even though your actions led to his death, you still go to prison for a very, very long time. Maybe she said, fine, let's go for the Hail Mary, the all or nothing. Let me either get out of here or go to prison for the rest of my life. And we just say battered spouse syndrome. Phop, that's what makes it fun, man. You're psychic and already answered my question. Well, I answered it again. Because if you have the question, more people do too. Tori, I think she has battered spouse, but I don't think she can go to imminent danger on the day. Her words will be undoing. Couldn't someone post the pictures be part of her attacking him? Yes. And again, that's where the testimony of this was mutual abuse. You also got arrested for beating him and attacking him and domestic violence against him. All of that is potentially going to be admissible at this trial now. Old man, anybody else would plead out, but Boone is so delusional. I wonder if the state is giving her the opportunity to plead to a negligent homicide. I wonder. I'd be interested in that. Because of the attention, sometimes they don't like to give those kinds of deals. Boricua Jewel, 3.1K in the chat. 200K is so close. Let's do this. Yes, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Now we've got till April to get to 200K for me to hop over there to the Orlando area and watch some of this trial live and give you some inside scoops. Hit that like button if you haven't already. And anybody you know following this case, let them know we're covering it. We'd love to have them and answer their questions. Nicole Wheeler, Old Faithful here in the chat, always supporting the channel. 180K, thrilled to see the growth of the lawyer you know. Can't stay. Just want to take a minute and thank John for all the work he has done, bringing new innovative changes to our favorite lawyers channel. Appreciate your contributions. Yes, John is much appreciated. Mandy Strong, thank you so much for this super sticker. Marcy Lynn, wasn't he begging to be let out? Doesn't that prove intention? That's what the state's going to use, and it's going to be a jury question. Was it negligent? Was it on purpose? Was she a battered spouse? Was she even the victim? Was he the victim? What happened? What's the history? How did we get here? Why did we get here? Why did she do this? What was she thinking? Those are all going to be fact questions for the jury. Thank you, Elin. Christy Hack. If I'm a juror, I would have a hard time believing this change of story. But as a juror, I should not know what we know here. I would hope it would come into trial to show the change of story. I love it, Christy. I love the way you're thinking. Because we've gone through a lot here. And so at this point, it's almost like we've had the evidence that may be admissible at trial come before you. And if this was the evidence, you would have a hard time changing, which is fair. Now we'll see what evidence is presented to this jury, which I think it will have a lot of her admissions, a lot of her interrogation, a lot of that body cam footage, especially to combat the battered spouse syndrome. What's interesting about these trials usually as well is the state will put on their evidence proving the case. Then the defense will put on this battered spouse syndrome with the expert testimony, maybe Sarah Boone's testimony. And the state then will not be able to put on their response until after. So the state usually cannot go on the offensive on this battered spouse syndrome until after the defense has presented their case. So it's interesting. Fiona Dahlia, welcome. Brianna, battered spouse syndrome used to be called burning bed syndrome, right? I don't remember that. I don't think this is anywhere near this level for Sarah. By all accounts, she gave as good as she got. And by her ex-husband's words, she gave more. It's going to be really important. Again, I don't want to jump the gun on what the lay witness testimony is going to be about what they saw and what this relationship was like, but it seems like that is going to be a huge part of the trial. And again, I think this trial is going to be longer. I thought this trial could have potentially been done in 3 days before this. Now there's no way it takes less than a week, I think, before we get a verdict in this case, and maybe more. I'm interested to see how long they're going to take for this trial. And maybe they said at the pretrial today how many days they're going to need, but I don't think they'd be able to without knowing what their expert testimony is going to be on both sides. Azam, thank you for the super sticker. Zoe, she put son in the suitcase before, battered spouse, my booty. Leah, thank you for the super sticker. And yes, I see a lot of comments by Elizabeth, by a lot of others in here. We are going on the Grizzly True Crime show today at 2 o'clock Eastern time. So check out that channel. Subscribe if you're interested in true crime stuff. I'm going to be on there. I'm really looking forward to it. We're going to be talking about the Idaho 4 case. I've been looking forward to it. So make sure you get over there and like that video. It's already up there and prepped and ready for you to like it and get ready for it later today. Sharon Day is a new member. Sandra Ramirez, I think her strategy of changing her defense makes me less inclined to believe battered spouse syndrome. How do you feel as a defense lawyer about that type of change in tactics? So this guy's hasn't been her lawyer for that long. So it's not like he's had the case for 3 years and just brought this up. Maybe that's what he thought he should have done from the jump. That could be true. So I don't necessarily know about that. And the jury won't know and shouldn't know that she just came up with this defense or determined this defense now, 3 years into the case. They won't know that. As far as they're concerned, this could have been the defense from day one. Now, they can compare it to the statements she made post-arrest or post-incident. So that'll be up to them. Mr. Roboto, there was a restaurant in Tallahassee I used to love called Mr. Roboto. Can she use diminished capacity defense due to intoxication? That is not available in Florida based on intoxication. And for a deeper dive on that, my dad and I did a video literally yesterday on the Idaho cases where we talked about insanity defense and diminished capacity in Florida and in Idaho and compared and contrast them. So if you want to check that out, Mr. Roboto, I recommend it. Eric M. Junker, her statement of, I expected him to come to bed, defeats battered spouse. Eric, 100%. And I think that over the next few months, we can take a deeper dive and a different look at that interrogation. If you guys have a clip from that interrogation that you think proves or disproves battered spouse, send it to me on Instagram or Twitter. Follow us on there at Tragos Law and send the clip there because I'm going to pull some clips. We'll do some videos over the next couple months looking at it with a different lens now that we know she's going to argue battered spouse. Thank you, Noakes, for the super sticker. We're going to have to wrap this up here in the next 5-ish minutes. Thank you, Jacqueline Weaver and Sarah Bellum for these super stickers here near the end. Jacqueline said, I can't send a message with my super chat. Well, go ahead and send a message, Jacqueline. I'll try to get to it. I have time for about 2 or 3 more questions here. All right. Any other questions? Jacqueline Weaver, I see the super stickers coming in. I haven't seen a question of yours post yet. Rich Cat, thank you for staying on top of this case for us. Absolutely, Rich Cat. And it's right here in my backyard. So, and all the rules and everything I know here in Florida makes it a lot easier. A lot of people saying, see you at Grizzly. Are you going to discuss in the future Delphi? Potentially, Nico. Probably not until after the Murdaugh trial is over, which is next week. This week, we're probably going to focus on Murdaugh now and maybe a couple other small things that happen in Idaho or this case. That was going to be our focus this week was this case, Murdaugh, and Idaho. Next week is probably going to be mostly Murdaugh, but I will dive back into Delphi in the future because I did see some discoveries happening and things like that. So some things I feel like I maybe can add value to where when the investigation's going, not as much. Azam, yeah, I've got the recommended notification. You will be on Grizzly yesterday. Double dose of lawyer, you know, for me, midnight and super early morning. Well, Azam, I'm pumped. You're always here with us. Thank you, Catherine, for the super sticker. Jacqueline, I'm still looking for your question. Have not seen it. But Peter, she said 1,000,000 times, this was not intentional. So how now can she claim that she left him in there? She's going to have to find a way that she didn't necessarily mean to kill him, But that's what ended up happening. She did want to stop him from the abuse, which this has been argued before. I wanted to stop him from hurting me, but I didn't necessarily intend to kill him. Jacqueline, here we go. Burning Bed Syndrome is from 1977 movie called Burning Bed. I want to say this battered spouse syndrome, I read a case from 1965, but I'm not positive. All right. We're going to call it here. We got Jacqueline's question, so that's good. Everybody, we got Catherine O'Neill's super sticker too, I believe, but just in case we didn't. All right. That's all. Hit that like button on your way out. I hope to see 3,000 likes once this video posts. I appreciate everybody joining us today. 2 o'clock, Grizzly, True Crime. See us on there. We're at 1.6K likes. So everybody hit that like button on the way out. We'll get to 3K in no time. I appreciate all you coming here, asking questions, subscribing. If you're part of the Rewatch crew, get in the comments, get your questions out. Until next time, I'm out of here.